For great Pokemon TCG product and prices, check out ccgcastle.com.
Hello, Pokemon fans! I'm Professor K for the Pokemon Evolutionaries, and welcome back to another Deck Tech Thursday. Now, as you guys know, we did take a week off here recently for Steam Siege, so we are finally back to continue our series where we profile a deck of competitive value here in the format. Now, I was going to flip over to expanded format, but I'm starting to realize that expanded format is really unpopular. A lot of people just don't really care for it because the same things keep winning, the same things keep doing well. Mostly it's Yveltal, but I mean, you got Night March, you got Toad, you got a lot of stuff here that's just pretty consistently good. So for the most part, we're going to just try to stick to standard format like we always have been. That's the only thing that ever really changes. Things happen, things get added, and it's a completely different format in my opinion, and it's a better one in my opinion as well. But that's just me. I personally prefer standard. That's just the way I've always been. Now, today's deck profile is going to be one that is pretty popular. We haven't profiled it yet. It hasn't done anything astounding in tournaments, but it has made appearances and it has the ability to do well. And that one, as you guys saw in the title, is Rainbow Road, which means it's all going to be focused around this guy right here, Xerneas from Breakthrough. And we're going to be focusing around one attack more than any other, and that is going to be Rainbow Force. Now, Rainbow Force does 30 damage for each different type of Pokemon on your bench. So the idea is you want to fill up your bench with a lot of different types of Pokemon, and you're going to hit for lots of damage as fast as you possibly can. This is a very good deck. It just sometimes doesn't get the start that it needs, but we're going to hopefully change that a bit here with this particular build. So we're going to be starting off here with obviously 4 copies of our main attacker, which is going to be Xerneas. Again, Rainbow Force is a great attack. You definitely can't say that it's bad by any means. Power Creation also isn't a terrible, actually it is, it's terrible. I'm trying to give it some optimism here, but Power Creation, 80 damage, and if it was healed during this turn, it does 80 more damage. I'm sorry, but 80 for 4 is never going to cut it. You're always going to want to be using Rainbow Force. Power Creation would only happen if you get completely wiped out. You know, you end up with a couple of Pokemon on the bench at the most, maybe like 2 or 3. Actually, 2. 2 is the most that you'd be able to have before Power Creation would do more damage. So yeah, Rainbow Force is what you're going to want to stick with, no doubt about it. So how are we going to get out lots of different type of Pokemon to make Rainbow Force hit for lots of damage? With a standard bench of 5, you're able to hit for 160 damage as long as they are all singular typing. So the only way we're going to do that is by working on Pokemon that have dual types, which were introduced, of course, to us in Steam Siege. So we're going to be focusing on some dual types. Number 1 being the Galvantula, which means we have 2 copies of Joltik here, 30 HP. The one good thing about this one is that it does have free retreat. Free retreat means if we start with it, we don't actually get like punished for it too much unless we're going first and we don't get anything else. That's the only time that really Joltik is going to hurt us in the standard format. That's just bad luck though, and it happens with every deck. So 2 copies of Joltik means we also have 2 copies of Galvantula from Steam Siege. Now, this actually is a pretty good card in and of itself. Double Thread for a single colorless energy does 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now, I know it says 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. There wasn't a Ratimate on this card. It is 2 of your opponent's benched Pokemon, and you apply weakness and resistance to those bench Pokemon. So if your opponent has a Shaman on the bench, you're hitting it for 60, and then next turn you're knocking it out for 2 prizes with 1 single energy because Galvantula is dual type, grass and electric, or lightning, I should say. Also, if your opponent has something that's weak to grass, say like a Manaphy, for instance, you're 2-shotting that Manaphy EX as well. So Double Threat is a pretty darn good attack in a game where you may need a little bit of time to recover. You can knock out things on the bench like that. So there's Galvantula. So that gives us a dual type right there in 1. So now, instead of having 5 different types of Pokemon, we've got 6. Well, let's see if we can get more. Next up here, we got 2 copies of Pawniard from Steam Siege. No particular reason why you'd ever use this to attack, so our main focus is going to be on Bisharp. So Bisharp is a pretty cool Pokemon. It has Retaliate for a single colorless energy as well. Notice a theme here, single colorless energy. Retaliate does 30 damage, and if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during his or her last turn, this attack does 60 more damage. So Bisharp can hit for up to 90 damage that way for a single energy, which is pretty darn good. 30 for one by itself is not, but if you're able to take a knockout, get knocked out, I should say, and then switch into Bisharp next turn and hit for 90 damage, it's pretty solid. In a deck where you may need a turn to recover, like I said, for Xerneas, obviously you're going to need 2 energy attachments, a double colorless and a fairy energy, or attach a fairy, max elixir, and then next turn attach a fairy. So now we're up to 7 different types of Pokemon on a bench of 5. Well, let's go ahead and continue that. We're gonna have 1 copy of Volcanion EX. It's only here for one reason and one reason only. It's a dual type of typings that we don't have yet. So it's very important that Volcanion EX makes it on the bench and stays there and does nothing else. Nothing else whatsoever. It's just there to be a dual type Pokemon. Now giving us 8 different types, allowing Xerneas to hit for a whopping 220 damage. That's pretty darn crazy if you ask me. I mean, if you got these 3 on the bench, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types. We've got our 6th different type would be here, Shaymin EX, which we'll get to that momentarily. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can actually have this on the bench as well, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's actually 8 different types. That's actually 250 damage. I just thought about that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types. 250 damage. That's insane. So, obviously, there's only one deck out there that doesn't run Shaymin that does well. That's Greninja. So we have to have 2 copies of Shaymin EX. The good news is I have seen these come down in price a little bit recently. How long it'll stay that way, I don't know. Maybe by the time I post this video, it'll already have gone back up. But Shaymins did come down slightly. They're still expensive, but they're still a staple and still necessary for so many decks in this format. Unfortunately, for people that are just trying to get into the game that don't necessarily have the money to spend on them or the cards to be able to trade for them. That's one of the bigger things, is not having the cards to trade for them. Because a lot of people don't really buy the cards necessarily. Most people just trade for them. So there's our Pokemon lineup. We have 8 different types of Pokemon amongst these group right here. So 250 damage is Xerneas max damage, which is enough to knock out every single card in the format right now, barring cards that have Fighting Fury Belt attached to them, like a Wailord, for instance. So next up, let's take a look at our supporter lineup. It's pretty standard as far as our draw support goes. Professor Sycamore, 4 copies of that. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. Nothing too surprising there by any means. And our next card is not going to surprise you either, because it is 3 copies of N Shuffle. Each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck. Each player draws a card for each of the remaining prize cards. So 3 of those for Sycamore. Standard draw support, especially with Shaymin. You don't need a 4th N. And most of the time you don't need the 4 Sycamore, but consistency is a thing. It's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. We also have 2 copies of Lysander. We're going to want to take big prizes as fast as possible. Xerneas is only 120 HP Pokemon. It can be knocked out pretty easily. Galvantula is only 90. Bisharp's only 100. Shaymin's 110. Our only bulky Pokemon is a Volcanion, and you never want to have this guy in the active position. So we're going to want to take prizes fast. 2 copies of Lysander is the way to get that done, so we can get things up into the active that we don't necessarily, that we want to knock out. We don't necessarily want to be sitting on the bench. Also, we have 1 copy of Pokemon Ranger. This is mostly for Giratina's Chaos Wheel, and also Jolteon EX, because Xerneas is our main attacker. He's a basic. We can get around it with these 2, but we can't deal a ton of damage, so we really do need something to get out of that. 1 copy of Pokemon Ranger, removing all effects of attacks on each player and his or her Pokemon. So, just in case, it's always nice to have that Ranger there if you've got the room in the deck. This time it does. Now, we're going to be introducing 1 new card, and only 1 new card, from this next set that just came out, which is Evolutions. That is going to be Brock's Grit. Now, right now, this card is not legal, but it will be very soon. Evolution's official release date was November 2nd, so I believe it's 3 Fridays from that day. So if what day was, I remember what day November 2nd was, but it will be definitely legal before the 23rd. I can guarantee you that, and it might even be legal a week sooner than that if the Friday was close near that. I didn't look it up beforehand. However, Bboc Grit. Shuffle 6 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. This is big for a lot of reasons. Obviously, having Pokemon on the bench is very important. So, if something gets knocked out, like Volcanion, or Bisharp, or Galvantula, they go in the discard pile. There's nothing you can do to get them back without either Super Rod or Bboc Grit. I think it's important to have one copy of Bboc Grit in here to get back as many as possible, especially if our stadium gets bumped. If our stadium gets bumped, which, by the way, spoiler alert, is Skyfield, we're going to lose a lot of bench space and a lot of Pokemon. So we got to get all of those things back as fast as possible. Bboc Grit will get it done faster than a Super Rod. And not to mention, you can VS Seeker for a Bboc Grit. You can't VS Seeker for a Super Rod. So if you have to discard Super Rod early, you can't get it back. So Bboc Grit, I think, is a good addition to this deck and adds a little bit of value to the competitiveness as on the deck as a whole. All right, items. We have 4 copies of VS Seeker. As I said before, being able to Seeker up Bboc Grit is definitely important. We can discard it early and not have to really think about it too much because we can always get it back unless we're under item lock. But right now, we really don't have to worry about Vileplume as much as we would have to worry about Toad in the expanded format. Vileplume is still a threat. Do not get me wrong. It is still huge. It is still popular, and it is still very good. But this is our out for that. Not to mention it gets back any other supporter as well, whether it be Ranger, Lysander, Sycamore, or N. Next up, we have 4 copies of Ultra Ball. Discard 2 cards from our hand, search your deck for a Pokemon, and reveal it, put it into your hand. This is the way we're going to get out all of our Pokemon pretty much on the board here. Most of the time it's going to go for Shaymins, but it gets out everything that we're going to need. So definitely need 4 copies of Ultra Ball. We also have 4 copies of Trainer's Mail, being able to look at the top 4 cards of the deck. You may reveal a trainer card you find there, put it into your hand, except for Trainer's Mail. So this gets all of our trainer cards, which there are a lot, as there are in most competitive decks. So very good card to have. We also have 2 copies of Max Elixir. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach a basic energy you find there to a basic Pokemon on your bench. So we can Max Elixir to a few Pokemon. Never Max Elixir to Volcanion or Shaymin. You can Max Elixir to Xerneas, Joltik, and Pawniard. These 2 only once. Never do any more than that, ever. And only do it if you absolutely have to be honest with you, because Xerneas is the one you're going to want to be having all of our energy. So you want to Max Elixir to a Xerneas that's on the bench if you can help it and if you can afford it. We also have 1 copy of Super Rod because, again, Bboc Grit is really good, but Super Rod also would help out as well. And I feel like it's important to at least have 1 copy of Super Rod as well, because I feel like this deck needed 2 Super Rods before. So now I think a Grit and a Super Rod is a good fit. No rhyme intended there. Also, we're on to our tools. We have 2 copies of EXP Share. When your active Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, you may move 1 basic energy card that was attached to that Pokemon to the Pokemon this card is attached to. These are what you're going to have going on Xerneas, because again, double colorless is one thing, but losing that basic energy is a big deal, especially if you have no way of getting another energy on this thing. You need to preserve those fairy energies as much as possible. It's one of the weaknesses of the deck, so EXP Share is an important tool card. We also have 2 copies of Float Stone. We want to put this on Volcanion and Shaymin, or Shaymin, or whatever, if this is prized. These are the only 2 Pokemon we want to worry about attaching these to. Maybe you want to do it to Bisharp if you can afford to, because it's got a 2 retreat cost and it gets you out of the active after you retaliate, or whatever the case may be. But definitely save 1 for Volcanion. 150% save 1 for Volcanion always, because you don't want this thing in the active position ever. Just in case you don't have that though, we do have a single copy of Escape Rope. Each player switches his or her active Pokemon with one of his or her benched Pokemon. Your opponent switches first. If a player does not have a benched Pokemon, he or she does not switch Pokemon. So your opponent's going to switch first. Don't switch, even though you may have an obvious move and your opponent knows what you're going to do. Let your opponent switch first, because that's what the card says to do. So that's another way to get out of something being in the active that you don't want there. Definitely important. All right, as I said, our stadium card is going to be 3 copies of Skyfield. Skyfield, each player can have 8 Pokemon on his or her bench. Now, we don't necessarily need 8 all the time. It's not a huge deal, but it definitely is helpful to have multiple Xerneas on the bench and also a Galvantula, a Bisharp, a Volcanion, and a Shaman. So it's beneficial to get that extra Xerneas out, and that way you can start powering them up in between turns as you're taking knockouts and things like that. Or I should say on your turn before you start taking knockouts and stuff. So that's it for our stadium cards, our item cards, and our supporter cards, as well as the Pokemon. So now our energy lineup. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fairy energy, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 double colorless energy. So this is the entire deck. 7 fairy energy is going to more than get the job done. You only need 1 fairy energy and a double colorless for your attack over here. You only need 1 energy here, or I'm sorry, 1 energy here, 1 energy here, and you can sky return if you needed to with a double colorless. So it's not a overdone energy lineup, but I feel like this is about the right number for consistency purposes, and I think it's still a strong deck. I don't think that it's top tier by any means, but I still think it's strong. It has the ability to do well. It has some decent matchups across the board. It does have some bad ones as well, though. So I think this is kind of one of those decks that's all about the meta call. I like it, it's fun, and it's good. But again, it can dead draw. If you don't get a powered up Xerneas quick enough, you're in big trouble. And also, it has a couple of bad matchups that we just don't like. So with that being said, guys, here is the deck. Do with it what you will. Make it your own. Switch some cards around, whatever you like. This is my list that I particularly like. I will be using this deck next Friday to face off against whatever N decides to build for his Deck Tech Thursday next week. So you guys definitely want to stay tuned for that. Deck Tech Thursday is back again on a regular schedule until we get our next set, which will be Sun and Moon base. So about the first week of February is the next time we'll take a break from Deck Tech for 1 week. So just keep that in mind, guys. That's why we skip it. All right, if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button, comment down below, and of course subscribe for more TCG content here on the Pokemon Evolutionaries, and we hope to see you guys in the next video. So until then, I'm Professor K. You all have a great day and take care.